Chair calls Stephen Rains, Executive Director of the Texas Low-Level Radioactive Waste Disposal Compact Commission. Welcome back. Thank you for being here. We show you registered to testify as Stephen Rains on behalf of the Texas Low-Level Radioactive Waste Disposal Compact Commission, and that you're testifying neutrally. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you for having me again. This is like my one opportunity session to come talk to you, to remind everybody what it is we do. I'm Stephen Rains. I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Low-Level Radioactive Waste Disposal Compact Commission. We usually don't talk about it very often, but it is an agreement, one of the rare agreements between the state of Texas and Vermont to form a compact to deal with radioactive waste for Texas and Vermont. We've built, as Chairman Landgraf knows all too well, there's a compact waste facility that's in Andrews, Texas, not far from Chairman Landgraf's district, where most of that waste goes to. We have 8 commissioners that I work for. 6 are appointed by Governor Abbott, and 6 are appointed by the Governor of Vermont. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what it is we do and what it is we don't do, which sometimes I think is just as important for y'all's benefit in understanding what it is we do. We regulate waste coming into and out of the state of Texas. They ask for import authorization to bring waste into the state of Texas. They apply. We post their applications online and allow for 35 days of public comment. After that, the commission will act before 100 days and decide whether to grant that import application or deny it, which happens rarely but on occasion. We also handle exports. If someone wants to ship radioactive waste out of the state of Texas to go have it disposed of someplace else, they go through the same process, and the commission will approve or deny that as well. What's really important is what we don't do. We don't deal with high-level waste, which I know has been a subject of a lot of discussion, particularly in the Texas legislature over the last few years. And even though we get brought into it on occasion, we don't actually deal with high-level waste. But if you have questions about it, I'm happy to answer any questions you have related to that. We meet on occasion every 8 to 12 weeks and take action on those items, monitor what goes on, and there are additional requirements. What we do are grant agreements for people to import that waste into the state and make sure they abide by those agreements. They go through a process. I'm glad TCEQ got to go in front of me. Any of the waste that is allowed to come in is first approved by TCEQ and goes through their rigorous process before it's ever allowed to be brought into the state as well. We make sure everyone complies with that, and if they don't, we hold them accountable if they don't comply with the agreements they have in place. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. That's really what we do.
Members, are there any questions for Mr. Rains? Vice Chair Ordaz.
Thank you, Chairman. From conversations and discussions from last legislative session, is there an update? I know there was conversations about a rule rewrite as far as conversations that were happening with the NRC, I believe, and what would happen in that in-between gray area of something that's greater than Class C that's allowed to be disposed. Do you have an update on that by chance?
So what's going on? There's a Part 61 of the NRC rules that relates to what can happen with near-surface disposal of waste, and there has been a movement for the past few years to allow for greater than C-class waste to be disposed of at near-surface disposal. And were that to be implemented, the NRC has proposed those rules but has not adopted them. Okay. If the NRC were to adopt that, they could be disposed of at near-surface disposal, and that would probably be at the same site, not at the compact waste facility itself that we watch over, but probably at some of the other things in the same complex. But the NRC has not approved that adopted rulemaking. They've been working on it for a really long time. Right. If that did happen, probably you would have a discussion at the legislature about whether the legislature wants to have that approved and disposed of here.
I know the chairman would be on top of that.
I think he's watched it pretty closely, actually.
Okay,
For
thank
better or
you.
worse. Chairman Anchia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rains, thanks for your service to the state. You've been at this for some time. And we've sort of, I guess, come up together in this process. Wanted to ask you just some basic questions for my knowledge, since I'm new to the committee. Differences between low-level and high-level waste. Question number 1, what are the most usual sources for waste in those two categories? And then capacity, number 3. And in that capacity question, I know that some operators in the past of the Andrews County facility have struggled financially or sought to get in and out of that investment. And what is sort of the current ownership structure and financial state of the operator?
Sure. So the first thing to talk about is that we monitor only low-level radioactive waste. So there's really about 5 different strata or 6 different strata of radioactive waste you can get to. There's very low radioactive waste that isn't subject to the same rules as other, it has radioactive material in it, but it's somewhat inert. We don't regulate very low radioactive waste. That can go into the REPR site, which is in the same complex, where out in Andrews. We regulate what's called A, B, and C level waste. So A, B, and C level waste is pretty inert stuff, but enough that we need to actually make sure it gets disposed of properly, because it could be unsafe if it got into different environments. A-level waste would be debris that you get from radioactive stuff. Medical waste is largely A-level waste. B and C-level waste is the stuff that comes out of nuclear power plants for the most part. And it's what you would imagine that's not spent fuel. All the other things that touch the radioactive material that are still hot and have a long half-life that needs to be disposed of in a proper place, usually in a container, because of what danger it presents. Anything above sea level waste is called greater than C class waste. And that can come from all kinds of different sources. That usually comes from nuclear power plants, most of it. Almost exclusively are what gets disposed of there. But there is some that comes from oil and gas, actually, that is greater than C class waste. It can't be disposed of. There's currently no disposal path for greater than C class waste or the spent fuel waste. It's disposed on site by whoever the generator is. It can be stored, but it can't be disposed, actually. And
My knowledge of the subject matter comes mainly from watching The Simpsons. So I wanted to ask, what is the most radioactive thing that exists, that is sort of produced? You may touch it or not touch it, but like, are they spent fuel rods?
Spent fuel rods is the big deal, and that's what's the current subject of a lot of discussion, is what to do with spent fuel rods. As you probably recall, Yucca Mountain was originally supposed to be the site that the federal government designed for spent fuel rods to be stored at, but that got
a little
derailed.
political, didn't it?
It did. Nevada decided they didn't want it, is probably the most base level way to talk about it, and the federal government stopped funding it. So Yucca Mountain is pretty much on hold and is not being developed at all. So spent fuel rods are stored actually at the nuclear power facility itself.
On site.
On site, and even when they're decommissioned, actually, it stays on the same site, which is the subject of a lot of discussion as well. There was a group.
And is that discussion about safety, national security kind of stuff, or what, or is it environmental?
It's really all the
concern?
above,
Okay.
actually, because you want to make sure it's safe and no one can get to it, obviously, for your risk for interveners or bad actors, right? So on site is actually what they've determined is the best case for some time. What's been the subject of a lot of discussion at the federal level, and last week, as a matter of fact, in front of the Supreme Court, there's a group that wanted to actually store the spent fuel site, not dispose of it, but to store of it for some time. They wanted to do that in West Texas, and that's currently being discussed by the Supreme Court as to whether that's going to be allowed, whether that license will come into place. I know the legislature acted back in 2021 related to that issue, but the spent fuel is definitely the worst stuff, other than, obviously what goes on in warfare and the nasty things that are left over. That is not handled by any of these. That's handled by DOD exclusively, right? What happens with that waste. But to answer your question you asked earlier, where does the waste come from? We get medical waste, your x-rays, any treatments that you get that have radioactive material in it, it needs to get disposed of. It gets disposed of at that site. You have waste from some really interesting sources. A lot of your outdoor advertising actually has radioactive material in it. And they have leftover waste from that gets disposed of. Your tires get irradiated, and that gets disposed of out there as well. And there's a lot of activity around medical material that actually has a lot of waste to it that gets disposed of at that site. One of the things that we do that probably is important for you to understand, there are waste collectors, trash collectors around the country that pick up everyone's radioactive waste, and then they want to ship it to Texas. We hold them to a little bit different standard on how we regulate what they are allowed to dispose of, and it's a much more rigorous process for them if you're collecting other people's waste and you're not generating it.
And
it's an
the
important part
chain
of
of
the process.
custody requirements and stuff like that? Yeah.
Yes, sir. She mentioned, Ms. Keel mentioned Superfund. The Superfund requirements on that are very important to us as well, to make sure we know who actually is the generator of that waste.
Okay. And then the last question, I know I fired off a lot. The last one related to ownership. Are they able to make money currently? Because I know we've had some challenges, people getting in and out of that investment, people going belly up.
Yeah, we don't get into the financials of what goes on the side. That probably would be a better question for TCEQ
Okay.
since they watch over their license. We don't regulate their rates. So I couldn't give you any more factual information than you probably could obtain from somebody else as to whether they make money. I know that there's a complex of things that they watch over. There's a wrecker site out there as well. There's a federal cell where they take federal waste. So the financials are somewhat tied into all of those things. We really watch over what goes at the compact waste facility itself. That's part of the compact. And since we don't regulate the rates, I can't speak to financials at all.
Thanks, Mr. Raines. Thanks for answering my questions.
You're welcome.
Members, any other questions? Mr. Raines, we appreciate your testimony today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Chair calls Todd Staples. Good morning, welcome back. We show you registered as Todd Staples on behalf of the Texas Oil and Gas Association, testifying neutrally. Is that correct?
That's correct.